The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised. Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Thank you for joining us, and happy Turkey Day.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Well, Beth and I hope that you're all enjoying your festivities with your family on this Thanksgiving Day.
Maybe going for a walk after your big meal, maybe playing football if that's your thing, or just hanging around the living room.
Yeah, and having some drinks and mellowing out.
I don't know why eggnog just popped into my head, but that's not really a Thanksgiving thing.
Well, it could be.
It could be an any day type thing, I guess.
Especially that bourbon eggnog.
Yeah.
It's really good.
Yeah. It'll be a while before I'm drinking any of that, but anyway.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess it is going to be a while before you can drink again. For all of you fellow wanderers out there, we just want to say that Beth was in the hospital last week because she woke up with a
painful and purple hand.
Right.
Let's just say what it was. A painful and purple hand.
Her hand was all swollen when I woke up. It was pretty much blue.
It was turning colors and very painful.
Yeah. It was pretty scary. So we went off to the ER. We got really good treatment. Our doctors were excellent. Gotta say that.
The nurses, too.
Yes, the nurses were outstanding. And you spent a night there.
38 hours. I probably would have known the minutes, too, but I was so excited to get out of there that I just, it was all a blur.
Well, with what you had going on, you're lucky you came home at all.
I know.
I just got to say, it's pretty scary.
Yeah. So if any of you are on blood thinners out there, I'm part of your club now. It's a fun one.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Yeah.
But it's better than the alternative.
Right.
So what happened was we found out that Beth had 3 blood clots. 1 in her neck, 1 in her lungs, and 1 in her wrist. Pretty lucky because 2 are in veins, but the third one's pretty bad. It's in an artery in her wrist. So hopefully the blood thinners stop this, and within 3 months or so, things go back to normal around here.
Yes, but we did want to mention it just because I don't know if it's serendipity or what, but last week we had said that we were going to start releasing some of our bonus episodes that were previously behind a paywall. We would re-record them, but then release them. So maybe, I don't know, it was fate or something, but we may be releasing more of those more recently or quicker than we anticipated because with the various doctor visits and stuff, we may not be able to
get all the research out of the way and put together an episode.
Yeah.
Because we do not want to miss a week. Since we started this 3.5 years ago, we have never missed a week of recording and putting out an episode. And even with all this now, we don't want to let all of our listeners down. We want to put out a weekly episode. So with that said, that's what's going on with us.
Yes. And tonight's episode is one of our premium bonus episodes, but we are sitting here re-recording it for you so that, it's fresh and new.
And with that said, why don't we get started?
All right. So, as we've said before, many times, while we're researching for our episodes, we frequently come across other things that are really interesting to us, but they don't exactly fit into our niche of supernatural or naturally weird because they have a very logical explanation. So tonight's topic falls under that category since it does have an explanation, at least a psychological one. But it was so interesting, at least it is to us, that we knew we wanted to do it as an episode because we figured that all of you wanderers would find it interesting too.
Yeah, when you showed this to me, I was like, this is freaking mind-blowing. We have to do an episode on this because it's just too cool.
Yeah. So I'm going to start off with fairy tales, kind of, in a way. So if you think about fairy tales, they are filled with glass imagery. Take Cinderella, for example, and her glass slipper, which, by the way, always seemed totally impractical to me. And she also had a glass carriage, which used to be nothing more than a pumpkin until it was bippity-boppity. The Wicked Witch uses the magic mirror to make demands. And then in Snow White, there's her glass coffin out in the woods for the prince to just stumble upon. You know, as a kid, I always found her in the glass coffin in the middle of the woods kind of creepy. But now, as an adult, I think it would just be a pain in the ass to keep it clean.
Yeah, can you imagine? All that acid rain coming down on it, the leaves sticking to it.
All the pollen.
Yeah. I mean, how would you keep it clean?
I picture the dwarves are like permanently armed with paper towels and Windex, and they just go out and they're constantly trying to wipe away all the deer and raccoon nose prints that end up all over the glass.
Yeah, I wouldn't want that job.
No. So, obviously, when it comes to fairy tales, I was definitely raised on the Disney version of those tales, which I know are much more tame than some of the original versions, which were way more nasty and brutal. There's a Grimm's fairy tale that I had never heard of before, called The Glass Coffin, and it's about a woman who is kept inside of one. And her entire village is kept in individual, smaller glass trunks.
Which is interesting because we know that the Victorians made glass coffins, which we've talked about before.
Right. And it's an interesting connection. But that's kind of topic adjacent, as we like to say, so we won't go into that too much. But for a period of about 200 years, coinciding with when many of these fairy tales were written, several members of various royal families had magicians and seers and alchemists on hand, and we've even done shows on some of them too. And although they didn't necessarily believe that everyday objects could be turned into glass, they did believe that glass held magical properties. But what if I told you that throughout history, some members of the royal family thought that their bodies were made out of glass? Imagine living your life under the constant fear that you could shatter at any given moment. And it's kind of funny that so many of our sayings that still exist today reference glass. People say things like, if one more thing happens, I might fall to pieces. Or we might say that an event was life-shattering. Or that somebody has a fragile ego.
Well, there's that Blondie hit song, Heart of Glass.
True. So the whole concept is still in our everyday vernacular. Now, to be fair, there are even earlier accounts of people believing their bodies were made out of strange things. For example, in the 2nd century, Rufus of Ephesus, who was a Roman scholar of medicine, wrote about a man who believed that he was made of pottery. Rufus came to the conclusion that sometimes when people's humors are out of whack, the whole blood, phlegm, yellow and black bile stuff, that they would become melancholics who often believed they were made entirely of parchment or, in several cases, earthenware or pottery. At any given moment, they might break. These people, dubbed earthenware men, could be cured if their humors were realigned. But then in the late 1300s, King Charles VI of France made a startling announcement. His body was not made of something so mundane as clay pottery. His body was made entirely out of glass. Now, to be fair, King Charles had a long history of mental illness, perhaps brought on by traumatic events in his life, although some might argue that his mental health issues caused traumatic events.
For example, in 1392, King Charles' brother Louis decided that he really liked a woman who was not his wife. Louis decided to take his army and go fight the armies of this woman's husband, who happened to be a French duke. He insisted that Charles come along. It was unbearably hot that day, but as Charles, Louis, and the soldiers rode along, an old man dressed in all white blocked their path. He insisted that Charles was in great peril because he had been betrayed. The soldiers shooed the man out of the way, but Charles was rattled by the encounter. A few moments later, when one of his pages accidentally made a clanging noise with his helmet, Charles whirled around on his own men, including his brother, screaming that the traitors must be punished. In his addled state, he killed one of his own men before going after his own brother, who he was certain was the one betraying him in some kind of way. It took several nights to restrain him. It was after this incident that Charles began to suffer from strange fits. He became increasingly paranoid and fearful, often raging at anyone around him. It often took several people restraining him for him to calm down. During each one of these periods, which, by the way, could last as long as months, Charles refused to bathe or change his clothes. It's said that there was at least one time in 1405 when his servants had to literally cut him out of his clothes after he refused any kind of personal hygiene for 5 months straight. It was also during these spells that Charles became increasingly fond of his brother's wife. Now, despite initially thinking that Louis was a traitor, Charles would voluntarily appoint him as regent each time he became incapacitated. But I'm not sure how Louis felt about Charles insisting that his sister-in-law was the only person who could calm him down, and therefore she had to be by his side 24/7. Maybe the brothers didn't have the best relationship, or maybe Louis did hold a grudge, because a few years later, after the incident where the old man in white was standing in the road and Charles accused his brother Louis of being a traitor, the brothers were attending a ball, and Louis did something horrendous. Charles, for whatever reason, decided to come to the ball in a wild man costume. He and some friends decided to wrap themselves in linen, which was covered in pitch, and then a layer of yellow flax. Now, people must have known that this was the plan all along, because all the torches in the room were moved out of the way before Charles and his entourage entered. Charles splintered from the group to go flirt with some lady, And when he did, Louis apparently approached the wild men to try and figure out who they all were. And in order to see better, he carried a lit torch. He thrust it into one of the men's faces, and all of them, except for Charles, who was still away from them in the room, caught on fire.
And they all died.
Well, of course. It's pretty sick.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine the smell.
Well, just the whole horrificness of it.
Well, they didn't have problems seeing after that. Can you imagine the light that put off? It's too bad they wouldn't have had stop, drop, and roll back then.
Well, I'm sure they invented it in the moment if they didn't know that already.
So yeah, it's really hard to say whether Charles already suffered from mental health issues, or if the events of his life created them, or just added to the ones that already existed.
But either way, the year after the initial run-in with the old man in white, Charles was in such a bad state that he couldn't remember who he was at all. He was not aware that he was king, nor could he even recall his own name. This was 1393.
So, when his own wife came to see him, he demanded that his servants take her away, as he had no idea who she was either. There was a period of about a year when Charles claimed that he was St. George and that he didn't recognize his coat of arms, because his true coat of arms had a lion on it with a sword thrust through it. There were also times that Charles would run through his home in Paris with such manic ferocity that the only way his family felt that he could be kept safe was to have the doors bricked up, which they did.
Now, you might be wondering what a king, who had to be restrained and who ran around his home in fevered excitement and mental distress, has to do with the glass delusion, which is what psychologists call the belief that one is made of glass. Well, during his spells, as they called them, King Charles did go through long periods where he did believe that he was made of glass. There were times when he would sit alone in his room for hours, completely motionless. He would wrap himself in blankets, specifically because he was afraid his bottom, his derriere, if you want a more genteel term, would break. He insisted that iron rods should be sewn into his clothes, so if he did actually bump into someone, he wouldn't accidentally shatter. So, in a way, it does make sense why he wouldn't bathe or change his clothes for weeks or months at a time. He was terrified of anyone touching him. One account, written by Pope Pius II, before he became pope, is very straightforward. He wrote, quote, "His malady grew worse every day until his mind was completely gone. Sometimes he thought he was made of glass and would not let himself be touched. He had iron rods put into his clothing and protected himself in all sorts of ways so that he might not fall and break." End quote. I can't imagine what type of mental anguish that man went through, because it just had to be hell to literally be trapped in your own personal hell like that.
Yeah, it's really strange, because I was thinking, why would you want iron rods if you think you're glass in your clothes? Because you think that the weight of them would push down and possibly break one of your limbs.
Right. It seems counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like they could have just used large wooden rods, which would have been much lighter and still effective.
Right. Or even pillows. And I know that sounds like I'm making light of the situation, but I mean, even to stuff your clothing with pillows, to me, seems more...
Makes more sense?
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, we don't know what they were thinking back then.
Right. King Charles suffered from the glass delusion off and on for the rest of his life until his death in 1422.
And as an aside, royals weren't the only ones who suffered from the Glass Delusion. In the year 1607, a man named Thomas Walkington published a book entitled The Optic Glass of Humours, in which he described the case of a Venetian man who believed his derriere and shoulders were made of glass. Because of it, he never sat down. Walkington didn't seem to have very much empathy, though, because he referred to the suffering man as a fool who never left the house because he feared a glacier would turn him into a window.
Oh, that poor guy.
Yeah, this sounds horrendous to have to go through. I can't imagine the suffering that these poor people went through.
And at least now our ability to treat different mental illnesses has improved greatly.
Also during the 1600s, a Paris doctor wrote about treating a man who believed his bottom was made of glass too. Unfortunately, this doctor's treatment was to beat the man as hard as he could, in an attempt to prove that the pain he felt was evidence that he wasn't made of glass at all.
Oh, that's a great psychiatry method. So, in 1621, way after Rufus of Ephesus's time, people still believed that most of our medical problems were caused by a misalignment of the four humors. English scholar Robert Burton published a book called The Anatomy of Melancholy, in which he proposed that fear caused by melancholy could manifest itself in several ways. He said that people suffering from melancholy might believe that they are all glass, and therefore will suffer no man to come near them, that they are all cork, as light as feathers, others as heavy as lead. Some are afraid their heads will fall off their shoulders. He tied the glass delusion directly to black bile. It was believed that when black bile was heated, it would take on a glassy sheen. Therefore, it made you think that you were made of glass. The idea of the four humors being responsible for pretty much everything continued into the 17th century. And since black bile was commonly associated with intellect, and since intellectual people were often portrayed as being rather melancholy, whether that was true or not, it was the common belief that intellectual people were more prone to the glass delusion. If they just stopped thinking so much and got outside for exercise, their problems would go away. And since it was wealthy, educated men who seemed to suffer from the glass delusion the most often, it seemed to make sense, at least to them.
And glass itself, like Beth said, was given mystical and magical properties from the very beginning of its creation. I mean, it was forged from fire. It was delicate, expensive, valuable, and special. It could be molded into intricate, beautiful objects. And it started from something as lowly as sand. So these wealthy intellectuals, or members of the royal family, could see themselves as special, as forged from fire, as priceless.
At least, that's one theory that we came across. I'm not sure that King Charles would agree with that. I think he probably suffered too much from his affliction to see himself as priceless, but I don't know because I'm not a King Charles VI expert. So maybe he did. I don't know. But it's interesting to note that at the height of the glass delusion, which was described in one article as almost an epidemic, coincided with the invention of Cristallo, a clear, colorless glass. Cristallo was incredibly valuable and considered chock full of magical properties. And it wasn't just men who suffered from the glass delusion. At the age of 23, Princess Alexandra of Bavaria made her own startling announcement. She wasn't made of glass, but she did swallow a piano made of glass as a child.
How in the hell would a person think that as they were a child, that they swallowed a glass piano?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if she thought she swallowed it in pieces and it reassembled, or whether she had a dream about it. I don't know.
Could it have been a miniature glass piano?
And then it grew over time? Because she believed it was a full-size piano.
Well, then, I have no idea.
I don't know. So, Princess Alexandra was the daughter of King Ludwig I. Her claim that she swallowed a full-size glass piano as a child surfaced right around the time that her father's affair with Lola Montez came to light.
All right. Why does it sound like I've heard this before?
Because when we did one of our bonus episodes on Anne Odelia Dis de Bar, do you remember her? She was the con lady?
Oh, that's right.
Okay,
yes,
so
yes.
One of her first cons was to claim that she was the illegitimate daughter of King Ludwig I and Lola Montez.
That's right.
Yes. So Princess Alexandra was King Ludwig's real daughter. So as a young child, Alexandra was very concerned with cleanliness and hygiene, and she insisted on only wearing white. She was very beautiful, and she could have married Prince Lucien Bonaparte, who was Napoleon's younger brother, except her father, King Ludwig, said no. He said he was worried about her health, but that he was also concerned that Lucien had been divorced.
So what year are we talking about?
About 1849-ish.
All right.
So her glass delusion was certainly different from other cases. And as I mentioned twice already, because I don't understand it, she did believe that she had a full-sized glass piano inside of her. So I'm wondering, as kind of a little aside here, if she had some body dysmorphia going on too. Like if she looked in a mirror, did she see herself as wide enough to have a piano in there? But I mean, I don't know. But every time I think about her case, I just have so many questions. So she would always walk very slowly, and she would turn slowly. She turned sideways very slowly to walk through every doorway so that she knew she could make it through the doorway, because she believed that if she bumped into anything, the piano inside of her would shatter into a million pieces. Rather than marrying her off, King Ludwig appointed her as the abbess of the royal chapter for Ladies of St. Anne, which was a religious community that only housed noble women. Some theorists suggest that Alexandra's fear of germs and her insistence on only wearing white, coupled with her glass delusion, may have been a psychological response to ideas about purity at that time. Being seen as innocent and pure was highly valued, and she may have believed the piano existed as a way of remaining eternally pure. She never did marry, but she did become a prolific writer of short stories and plays. Her first book of stories was published in 1852, and by 1873 she had published no less than 9 pieces, including translations, plays, essays, and short stories. She donated all of the proceeds from at least one of these publications to charity.
So not once in her life did anybody tickle any of her keys.
Oh, God.
All right. Although he wasn't technically royalty, some people believe that the composer Tchaikovsky may have also suffered from the Glass Delusion. Tchaikovsky lived from 1840 to 1893, and he composed beautiful concertos and symphonies, which he's known for. But Swan Lake and the Nutcracker are probably two of his most recognized pieces. There are several accounts in which Tchaikovsky claimed his body was extremely fragile. Although he never quite came out and said it was because it was made of glass, he did exhibit some telltale signs that he might have thought so. For example, he did believe that if he was jostled too much, his head would fall off, which is something Robert Burton noted back in 1621, that it was one of the fears that melancholic people had. The only way to prevent this was if he held onto his chin with one hand at all times. This made conducting in an orchestra rather difficult and at times impossible. But fortunately, he was able to overcome his belief. Other historians point out that Tchaikovsky had a lot of other things going on. He lived in constant fear of his sexual orientation being outed. And he went through bouts of depression, self-loathing, and debilitating self-doubt. So he may fall under the category of glass delusion as well, or it may have been something entirely else. But I thought that it was probably worth mentioning.
Yeah, it's part of that canon of things for sure. And there were other cases as well. A current psychiatrist in the Netherlands named Andy Lamegen began researching the glass delusion, and he uncovered recorded cases from 1883 where a patient in an Edinburgh, Scotland asylum believed her legs were made of glass. While he was lecturing on the subject, Lamegen was approached by another psychiatrist who had found a case in his hospital from the 1930s. In this case, a woman was convinced that her legs and her back were made of glass, to the point that she wouldn't let nurses get close enough to help her in any way. Together, they also uncovered a case from 1964. Now, I couldn't find an exact date, but since Lamegen is currently a psychiatrist, this next case that I'm going to tell you about had to have occurred in the last 30 years or so, maybe within the last decade. He has said in several articles, and the one I'm referencing is from the BBC, that a patient came to the university clinic in Leiden, where Lamegen works. He spoke to the young man for several hours, and this young man confirmed that his entire body was made of glass. At one point in the conversation, the young man pointed to the window and asked Lamegen to describe what he could see. The doctor said he could see buildings and cars and people walking by. The young man replied, quote, "Ah, you've missed the glass in the window. You didn't see it, but it is there. That's me. I'm there and I'm not there, like the glass in the window." End quote. He went on to say that he could appear and reappear when he felt like it. As the conversation progressed, Lamegen discovered that the young man had recently been in an accident, and since then his family had been overly protective of him. The doctor hypothesized that the glass delusion was a way for the man to regain some control of his life.
Well, that makes sense, because I came across something recently that's pretty interesting And it was a psychological article that proposed that throughout human history, people who suffered from delusions often based their delusions in the latest technology.
And that does make sense.
It does. For example, also in the 18th century, there are accounts of people in Europe who believed that their bodies, or parts of their bodies, were made of cement. Coincidentally, cement was new and being used in construction all over Europe. In the 20th century, a good number of patients began experiencing delusions related to technology. In the 1940s, several cases cropped up where people believed that they were being controlled by radio waves. And in the 21st century, some people are afflicted with the idea that they've had a computer chip inserted in their brain that tells them what to do or monitors their every move. So if that correlation is true, that people tend to create delusions based on the most prevalent new technology, then believing you were made of glass back in the 1300s actually makes sense.
Right, and that Crystallo was the brand new glass that only the really wealthy could afford.
Right.
Yeah. That's really interesting.
What's going to be the next trend?
AI, of course.
Well, after reading that, it does make a lot of sense how people throughout time believe this, and then it coincides with technology, which has me thinking I'm going to have to, as we're doing research, see what else we stumble upon where people are now thinking that they're fragile because of some new technology that's going on now.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see that correlation. For sure.
Yeah. I don't know what it could be. It makes me want to go back before the 1300s now and see how far back I can go and find out if there were any other people suffering from delusions of fragility.
Based on whatever the newest technology was at the time.
Right.
Yeah, that would be interesting. There's got to be something out there that you can get started, looking for that sort of information.
Well, I'll have to go back and try to do a deep dive. Scour the internet, see what I can find.
That's what we do.
That is what we do.
Not this week, but what we do all the other weeks of the year.
Right. Well, I think we've got a good excuse why we didn't this week.
Yes.
That about wraps it up for this episode. Join us again next week for an all-new episode of Where Minds Wander.
See you soon. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment on your favorite listening platform. It really helps us move up the list and become more visible on the podcast charts so new people can find us.
And thank you all for your continued support.
See you next week for an all-new episode.